Okay, the last couple of movies were a little bit challenging to the old brain, so we're going to lighten things up a little bit and talk about some of the additional puppet tools. In After Effects CS4 Essential Training, we looked at the puppet pin tool, which we use to deform 2D layers. In this, we were going to look at the puppet overlap and the puppet starch tools. Now, in this first example, we have a little robot here named Herbie. I've used him a lot in my training throughout the years, a little robot I made in 3ds Max. He's getting a little old, though, so we're going to retire him in this movie. I replaced him with Eddie Technology, a new robot that I've made in another 3D program, Cinema 4D. So we're going to retire Herbie here. So we have this dance party for him. And let's preview that and see what it looks like. Nice. So we're going to send Herbie out in style. Now, as we scrub this animation, we could see that when his hands overlap, I want his hands to go in front of him, but one hand actually goes behind his body, and the other one goes in front. And also, if you look really closely, sometimes his hand actually cuts through the body layer. There's a few extra pixels there. Now, this really isn't After Effects' fault, because when I deform the puppet pins, it's basically a 2D layer folding over itself. So what we need to do to control how this 2D layer overlaps itself is to apply overlap pins. So I'm going to go back to the first frame, and I am going to select the robot layer, and I'm going to select the puppet overlap tool, which will allow me to create overlap pins. Now, when you're creating overlap pins, they kind of give you a guide here, these little yellow X's. These are where you put the deform pins. Now, you can adjust them from here while you're creating overlap pins. It's just kind of for reference. But I'm going to put some at his hands. Notice that the overlap pins are blue to distinguish them from the deform pins. Now, when you create a pin and it's selected, you can go up to the top in the options bar and you have a couple choices. You have the in-front value and the extent. So if I take down the extent, it controls how much of the object is being influenced by this overlap pin. Since we want to influence the whole torso, I've taken it up to about 80 or so. You want to do the same thing on the arms. Select the overlap pin for the arms. Again, take it to about 80 so that the arm is covered, but not too much more than that. Now, the in-front value is what determines what is in front. And it's actually pretty easy. Whatever overlap pin has a higher value, that part of the object will be in front. So in this case, I want Herbie's right arm, the one on our left side, to be in front the most. So I'm going to take the in front value to, let's say, 75. Now this could be 1 or 2 or whatever, but since the default value is 50, I usually do things kind of relative to that. So let's go up to 75. You could make it 51 if you'd like. And then I'm going to select his left hand, which is the one on our right, and take that to anything below 75. I'm just going to use 50. And then we want both of these arms to be in front of the torso. So in order for the torso to be behind both hands, then it needs to have a lower in-front value than any of the hands. So this hand has a value of 75, and his left hand has a value of 50. So as long as, again, this torso point is below 50, then it will be fine. Right now it's set to 32, so we'll just leave it there. That's fine. So now I'm going to hit the letter V to get the selection tool. I always like having that tool selected, so in case I click somewhere on accident, it doesn't mess me up. And I'm going to deselect the layer, and now we can preview this and see what it looks like with the arms overlapping correctly. So now as we play this back, we could see Herbie more fully shaking his moneymaker, and it just looks cooler because these hands overlap. And again, notice how his right hand is in front of his left hand, and his left hand is in front of his torso. That's exactly how we set those up based on their in-front values. If I wanted his left hand in front, then I would need to make it something above 75%. So with that, we'll thank Herbie for sharing his dance talents with us, and we'll go over to the starch pins comp. Now what we're going to do is I'm going to hit the home key, and I'm going to select the head beard layer. There's a few layers here. There's some eye layers and a mustache layer and the hat layer. But what I want to play around with here is the beard right here of the wizard, which is actually attached to his face. Now let me show you the problem before we get to the puppet starch tool and the solution there. I'm going to click on his beard with the puppet pin tool. Maybe put one on his beard, and one on his mustache, one over by his ear there, maybe one by his forehead. And as I then go and grab the one on his beard and move this around, we see that his eyes are moving a lot, his nose is moving a lot, the back of his hair is just going crazy there. And so we want to make it so that we can move his beard as if it was blowing in the wind, or maybe he's talking or something. And so the puppet starch tool is the perfect candidate for the job here. I'm going to undo that with Command Z. Then I'm going to go to the Tools panel and select the Puppet Starch tool. And I'm going to place a couple pins here, one by his forehead, the back of his head, and probably this crazy hair back here. Now, just as with the overlap pins, we have an extent value here to determine how far the reach of that pin is. So I want to select these starch pins and increase the extent so a lot of this stuff is covered. And actually, I want to make sure the back of his head is covered too. So I'm going to select the back of his hair and increase the extent until that's covered also. Now, with each starch pin, notice that they're red as well, just like deform pins are yellow and overlap pins are blue, starch pins are red. We also have an amount, and that allows us to control how much stiffness is used for each pin. If we take this down to a low value, and the default's 15%, which is actually fairly low, then this will move still a little bit, but not as much. But if we really crank this amount value, then these pixels aren't going anywhere, and that's kind of what I want here. Also notice as I increase the amount value for a starch pin that the polygons around it become more opaque. So now I could go switch back to the puppet pin tool, and now watch as I move these pins around, the head is not moving in any way, shape, or form. The back of the hair is not moving. Everything's been anchored down. So the starch pins give you the capability to lock pixels down and make sure that while you're deforming the layer with the deform tools, that other pixels that you don't want to move don't move, or maybe that they move less than they normally would. And so there you have it, folks. Using the puppet overlap pins with the puppet starch pins make the puppet tools a complete suite of animation goodness.